Wow. Food was good? Yeah, delicious, wasn't it? Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm really honored to be with you here at this celebration of life. And I hope that there's some blood to go to my brain. I think most of it's in my stomach right now, but I'll try to. It's so funny to hear as we travel around, Madeline and I, that sometimes people say, oh, being a vegan is so hard. You must feel deprived most of the time. We always laugh whenever we have one of our great meals, and it gets better and better. I really am feeling very encouraged. I know this is probably one of the hardest times of the year for people who are vegans or even vegetarians, because there's this massive killing of over 45 million turkeys, sentient beings who, in many ways, I think people just see them as mere pieces of meat. And I think it can be very discouraging for us if we're serious about compassion for animals and environmental sustainability and world peace, to see this kind of activity going on and the behavior, and see in many ways how disconnected we are as a culture from the realities that underlie our food choices. However, I think there's also a lot of reasons for us to be very optimistic, because I think under the surface of things, there's a lot of people beginning to question the routine killing and confining and mutilating of animals for food. And so I want to just start off by saying I'm really grateful to all of you. If you found your way into this room here this afternoon, then you have started questioning on some level. You're opening to this and beginning to be a voice for compassion and for the liberation, and really for creating a world where peace and sustainability and justice are actually possible. And the basic idea I'd like to share with you really is just to understand that all of us have been born into a culture that has a hidden core that it's essentially taboo to even talk about, and that is the routine mistreatment of animals for food. I think everyone in our culture feels essentially remorseful at a deep level about what we're doing to animals for food routinely. The essential thing is that we are, in the United States alone, killing about 75 million animals every single day. And this is a very conservative estimate. So this is something that's going on routinely and relentlessly, again, behind the curtain of our culture's facade. And it's something that is happening not because there's a huge budget from the government that's just paying for it and we can't do anything about it. It's because most people are taking out their wallets and paying for that to happen day after day. So the question is, how do you get people to do this, and what kind of a mentality is required in order for people to do this, again, relentlessly day after day, to take out their wallets and actually pay people to hyper-confine and mutilate and kill animals, and then not only eat them but give them to their children, when it's obviously, I think very clearly, very obviously not in their best interest. It's not in the best interest of our physical health, our psychological health, our spiritual health, our environmental health, on every level, our cultural health. On every level, eating animals for food is devastating to the outer environment as well as to the inner environment that we are abiding in. And yet, how can we just not get it? Because I think we all know, again, in our bones, that our cultural trajectory as we're going today is one of increasing devastation. If we keep going the way we're going in terms of our technology, in terms of what we're doing to the earth, what we're doing to each other, the economy, our health, it's absolutely unsustainable on every level. We're right now, for example, in the Amazonian rainforest, we're cutting down approximately 1 acre of rainforest per second. And they've just liberalized the laws in Brazil to allow them to, some people say, to double that. So now it'll be 2 acres per second. And this is really something that I think, when you look deeply into it, you see that the driving force behind that is animal agriculture. It's cutting down trees, clearing forests, cutting, slashing, and burning in order to grow more soybeans to feed to factory farm chickens and turkeys and pigs and factory farm fish, as well as to graze cattle. And so there's this driving force. People are being told and are yearning for some reason to eat more animal foods. It's an ascendancy, especially in so-called third world countries. And so the driving force behind this is eating animal foods, and we don't realize that this kind of devastation, we don't talk about it, we don't think about it, but that it reverberates in so many different ways. And so understanding what we're doing to the oceans, understanding what we're doing to the land. Madeline and I, as we heard, we live in a solar-powered RV, we travel around the country, and what we see basically everywhere is monocropped fields of corn and soybeans that are grown not to feed human beings typically. The vast majority is to feed, again, hyper-confined animals who are stuck away in these stinking sheds where they never see the light of day, and there's enormous suffering to these animals, but to the earth itself, there's enormous suffering. Cutting down trees to grow crops, you're not just cutting down some trees. I mean, that's bad enough, but that's destroying whole communities of life that took millions of years to evolve. We're in the largest mass extinction of species in over 65 million years, and it's driven, again, primarily by one thing, which is human beings eating animal foods. And the enormous amount of petroleum and water and land that it takes in order to do this is something that I think is so obvious, and yet we live in a culture where in the mass media and pretty much in the general cultural consciousness, we just don't want to talk about it. And so that's one level. And I think what I really want to emphasize is that eating animal foods is something that's devastating to not only to the outer systems in so many ways, like the environmental health and the cultural health as well, but to the inner clarity and the inner awareness, the mentality. It really works on these two different levels. Martin Luther King said, I think it's very important for us to remember, which is, he said, violence anywhere hurts everyone everywhere because we're all interconnected. And I think that, again, on another level, what Madeline often says, and as we talk about this, is compassion and kindness and mercy anywhere helps everyone everywhere because we're all interconnected. And to realize that even, right here, what we're doing here, it may not seem like we're interconnected to the rest of the culture, but we really are in a very powerful and deep way. And every action that we take in our lives that is an action to help bless the world in some way, where we take out our wallets and pay for organic and plant-based foods and things that are not tested on animals, where we try to be as conscious as we can and be kind and loving and caring and compassionate to other living beings, those efforts are never lost. And so when we, on the other hand, pay for foods that cause others to do the worst things, and this is something that's so interesting, like there was just recently, you may be aware, Mercy for Animals did an undercover investigation on the egg production facility that provides McDonald's. You know what I'm talking about? And they say, oh, this is terrible, and McDonald's just discontinued them, and of course they don't say, well, whoever they're going to get to replace them will be doing the same dang thing, because what Mercy for Animals always says is they find, whenever they do an undercover investigation, they always find horrific cruelty and violence to animals. I mean, always. There's never a case when they don't find that, because this kind of work brings out the worst in people, and the people that have to do this work have the highest rates of suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, spousal abuse, child abuse. They very often go back into their communities and do to the people in their communities what they're doing to these animals, because it's desensitizing. And so how do we possibly think that we as a culture can create a world of peace and harmony, beauty and joy and love and compassion and caring, when we are not only paying people to do this on a massive scale of 75 million animals a day, but then we're actually taking the products of that and eating them, actually feeding them to ourselves and to our children. And so there's a massive disconnect between the violence towards the earth, towards other people. And the other thing, really to just emphasize, is that there's this wonderful truth, which is that, and I think this should be also on the front page of the New York Times every day, we're growing enough food in this world, on this planet, to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. And no one argues this. We're growing plenty of food to feed everybody twice over. How is it possible that we could have 1 billion of our brothers and sisters starving to death, hungry and malnourished, while we feed massive amounts of grain that could easily feed everyone to animals who are extremely inefficient at converting healthy carbohydrates and lipids and proteins into massive amounts of toxic sewage, as well as saturated fat, cholesterol, and acidifying animal protein. And so we have roughly 1 billion people starving, while on the other hand we have roughly 1 billion people who are the wealthy ones who are getting the diseases that come from eating diets that have excessive amounts of these foods, and they're getting heart disease and having strokes and diabetes and obesity and arthritis and diverticulitis and autoimmune diseases, and this whole range of diseases that come from eating these foods. So, the great good news is that we can transform this. There's nothing stopping us, but eating animal foods causes the outer problems that we see environmentally and on literally every other level. I don't have time to go into it really here, but in the World Peace Diet I go through that whole thing. That's on the surface level, and it's incredibly powerful, but I want to talk about really what's going on underneath all that, because what is the mentality that is required of us to do this? What is the mentality that's required of us to eat meals that are based on animal foods? The number one fundamental mentality that's really, in a sense, injected into all of us as little kids growing up in this culture from birth, really from infancy, is a mentality of reductionism. We're taught early on that certain beings are not beings. Those beings are objects. They're just things to be eaten. So it's this mentality of reductionism, of commodifying life. It's called paradigmatic learning. It's learning the paradigm of a culture, and it's injected every single meal by the rituals in our culture of my mother, for example, saying, well, tonight we're having, or this morning we're having bacon. You know, she didn't say what we're really having. We're having the flesh of an animal that was a pig that was killed and tortured. No, we're having bacon. So we don't really know what we're doing. Things are reduced. Beings are reduced to things. It's also essentially a mentality of exclusion, that certain beings we just routinely exclude from the circle of our compassion and concern, while others we include. And this again, one of the things I realized when I was doing the research on the World Peace Diet is that whatever we do to animals, we eventually end up doing to each other. And this you can see enacted out in countless ways. So the mentality underlying our food choices, I think, is something that's really important to understand. Another essential subtext of every meal in this culture is of privilege and elitism. Because, again, the subtext of every meal, besides being of reductionism and exclusion, it's that certain beings are inherently superior to others, and the superior beings can use the inferior beings however they want, because they have more power. It's might makes right. I have more power, so I can use you. And these beings who are considered to be inferior, their interests are not protected. So we were aware that there's a hierarchy of how well a being's interests will be protected, and it's built into this system. If you go into any grocery store and just look at these cute little jars of baby food, you will see little jars of peas and bananas, but you'll also see little jars of veal and turkey and beef and chicken and cheese and so forth. So we're getting this message from the people we trust the most, from our parents, from our ministers, and from the media, and from our teachers in school, from the government, from every dimension. It's an absolutely sealed system where every institution in our culture agrees that these beings are just put here in a sense for us to use, and this mentality is injected into all of us. I think when you go into this in depth, like in the World Peace Diet, I go into the history of this and how herding started and how slavery and war and the domination of women and a lot of other things are all connected with dominating animals for food. And when we begin to see how this all fits together and how our health, we have a physiology that does not require any animal to suffer to feed us, and in fact it's just the opposite, that we actually are just as healthy or perhaps even healthier not eating animal foods, then we begin to see that we can make a powerful difference. And so I think there's nothing more important for any human being to do on this planet today than to make an effort to understand the ramifications of our food choices and then make an effort to bring our lives into alignment with our values.